Hello, everyone. It is a good day to have a good day. It is a very good day to have a good day. So, today I am planning on going and doing just a chill reading stream. Nothing really crazy. Oh, hang on. This is... Okay, there we go. Hi, how we doing today? Today's very chill, very fun, very good vibes, So yeah, as I was saying, before I had to adjust everything, we are going to be doing some live reading. I am going to be reading some Edgar Allan Poe short stories and one poem. If you don't know, Edgar Allan Poe was an American poet, short story writer, playwright, editor, critic, essayist, and one of the leaders of the American Romantic movement. He is heavily influential in the creation of the American short story. He helped start the genre of detective fiction and crime fiction. He also is credited with having started the science fiction genre. He died very young at the age of 40. Hello, Nora. Hey, how are you doing? The cause of his death was undetermined. They found him completely out of his mind and delirious in the streets of Baltimore, and he died 3 days after he was found. And nobody knows what happened to him. He is also probably one of the most famous people to come out of Baltimore. So it's a good time. The first thing we will be reading today is going to be The Telltale Heart. This is one of his more famous short stories. Let me just bring up my reading app here. Okay. True. Nervous. Very, very dreadfully nervous I had been and am. But why will you say that I am mad? The disease had sharpened my senses, not destroyed, not dulled them. Above all was the sense of hearing acute. I heard all things in the heaven and in the earth. I heard many things in hell. How then am I mad? Hearken and observe how healthily, how calmly I can tell you the whole story. It is impossible to say how first the idea entered my brain, but once conceived it haunted me, day and night. Object there was none. Passion there was none. I loved the old man. He had never wronged me. He had never given me insult. For his gold I had no desire. I think it was his eye. Yes, it was this. He had the eye of a vulture, a pale blue eye with a film over it. Whenever it fell upon me, my blood ran cold, and so by degrees, very gradually, I made up my mind to take the life of the old man, and thus rid myself of the eye forever. Now, this is the point. You fancy me mad. Madmen know nothing, but you should have seen me. You should have seen how wisely I proceeded, with what caution, with what foresight, with what dissimulation I went to work. I was never kinder to the old man than during the whole week before I killed him. And every night, about midnight, I turned the latch of his door and opened it. Oh, so gently. And then, when I had made an opening sufficient for my head, I put in a dark lantern, all closed, so that no light shone out, and then I thrust in my head. Hello, Infamous! We're reading The Telltale Heart by Edgar Allan Poe today. Oh, you would have laughed to see how cunningly I thrust it in. I moved it slowly, very, very slowly, so that I might not disturb the old man's sleep. It took me an hour to place my whole head within the opening, so far that I could see him as he lay upon his bed. Ha! Would a madman have been so wise as this? And then, when my head was well in the room, I undid the lantern cautiously. Oh, so cautiously. Cautiously, for the hinges creaked. I undid it just so much that a single thin ray fell upon the vulture eye. And this I did for 7 long nights. Every night, just at midnight. But I found the eye always closed. And so it was impossible to do the work, for it was not the old man who vexed me, but his evil eye. And every morning, when the day broke, I went boldly into the chamber and spoke courageously to him, calling him by name in a hearty tone and inquiring how he had passed the night. So you see, he would have been a very profound old man indeed to suspect that every night, just at 12, I looked in upon him while he slept. Hello, Sonic. Thank you for joining us. We are reading Telltale Heart by Edgar Allan Poe today. I thought it would be a good day. I thought it would be a good week for some spooky stories to be told in the dark. Upon the 8th night, I was more than usually cautious in opening the door. A watch's minute hand moves much more quickly than did mine. Never before that night had I felt the extent of my own powers, or my sagacity. I could scarcely contain my feelings of triumph. To think that there I was, opening the door little by little, and he not even to dream of my secret deeds or thoughts. I faintly chuckled at the idea, and perhaps he heard me, for he moved on the bed suddenly, as if startled. Now, you may think that I drew back, but no. His room was as black as pitch, with the thick darkness, for the shutters were closed, fastened, through fear of robbers. And so I knew that he could not see the opening of the door, and I kept pushing it on steadily, steadily. I had my head in, and was about to open the lantern, when my thumb slipped upon the tin fastening, and the old man sprang up in bed, crying out, "Who's there?" I had kept quite still, and said nothing. For a whole hour I did not move a muscle, and in the meantime I did not hear him lay down. He was still, sitting up in bed, listening, just as I have done night after night, hearkening to the death watches in the wall. Presently, I heard a slight groan, and I knew it was the groan of mortal terror. It was not a groan of pain or of grief. Oh, no. It was the low, stifled sound that arises from the bottom of the soul when overcharged with awe. I knew the sound well. Many a night, just at midnight, when all the world slept, it has welled up from my own bosom, deepening with its dreadful echo of terrors that distracted me. I say I knew it well. I knew what the old man felt, and pitied him, although I chuckled at heart. I knew that he had been laying awake ever since the first slight noise when he had turned in the bed. His fears had been ever since growing upon him. He had been trying to fancy them causeless, but could not. He had been saying to himself, "It is nothing but the wind in the chimney. It is only a mouse crossing the floor." Or, "It is merely a cricket which has made a single chirp." Yes, he has been trying to comfort himself with these suppositions, but he found it all in vain. All in vain, because death and approaching him, had stalked with his black shadow before him and enveloped the victim. And it was the mournful influence of the unperceived shadow that caused him to feel, although he neither saw nor heard, to feel the presence of my head within the room. When I had waited a long time, very patiently, without hearing him lay down, I resolved to open a little, a very, very little crevice in the lantern. So I opened it. You cannot imagine how stealthily, until, at length, a single dim ray, like the thread of the spider, shot out from the crevice and fell full upon the vulture eye. It was open, wide open, and I grew furious as I gazed upon it. I saw it with perfect distinctness, all a dull blue with a hideous veil over it that chilled the very marrow in my bones. But I could see nothing else of the old man's face or person, for I had directed the ray as if by instinct, precisely upon the damned spot. And have I not told you that what you mistake for madness is but over-acuteness of the senses? Now, I say, there came to my ears a low, dull, quick sound, such as a watch makes when enveloped in cotton. I knew that sound well, too. It was the beating of the old man's heart. It increased my fury, as the beating of a drum stimulates the soldier into courage. But even yet, I refrained and kept still. I scarcely breathed. I held the lantern motionless. I tried how steadily I could maintain the ray upon the eye. Meantime, the hellish tattoo of the heart increased. It grew quicker and quicker, and louder every instant. The old man's terror must have been extreme. It grew louder, I say, louder every moment. Do you mark me well? I have told you that I am nervous, so I am. And now, at the dead hour of night, amid the dreadful silence of that old house, so strange a noise as this excited me to uncontrollable terror. Yet, for some minutes longer I refrained and stood still. But the beating grew louder. I thought the heart must burst. And now, a new anxiety seized me. The sound would be heard by a neighbor. The old man's hour had come. With a loud yell, I threw open the lantern and leaped into the room. He shrieked once only. In an instant, I dragged him to the floor and pulled the heavy bed over him. I then smiled gaily to find the deed so far done. But for many minutes, the heart beat on with a muffled sound. This, however, did not vex me. It would not be heard through the wall. At length, it ceased. The old man was dead. I removed the bed and examined the corpse. Yes, he was stone dead. I placed my hand upon the heart and held it there many minutes. There was no pulsation. He was stone dead. His eye would trouble me no more. Yes, smiled gaily. We must remember that gay had a very different meaning back in the 1800s. If still you think me mad, you will think so no longer when I describe the wise precautions I took for the concealment of the body. The night waned. I worked hastily, but in silence. First of all, I dismembered the corpse. I cut off the head and the arms and the legs. I then took up 3 planks from the flooring of the chamber and deposited all between the scantlings. I then replaced the boards so cleverly, so cunningly, that no human eye, not even his, could have detected anything wrong. There was nothing to wash out, no stain of any kind, no blood spot whatever. I'd been too wary for that. A tub had caught all. When I had made an end of these labors, it was 4 o'clock, still dark as midnight. As the bell sounded the hour, there came a knocking at the street door. I went down to open it with a light heart, for what had I now to fear? There entered 3 men who introduced themselves, with perfect suavity, as officers of the police. A shriek had been heard by a neighbor during the night. Suspicion of foul play had been aroused. Information had been lodged at the police office, and they, the officers, had been deputed to search the premises. I smiled. For what had I to fear? I bade the gentleman welcome. The shriek, I said, was my own, in a dream. The old man, I mentioned, was absent in the country. I took my visitors all over the house. I bade them search well. I led them at length to his chamber. I showed them his treasures, secure, undisturbed. In the enthusiasm of confidence, I brought chairs into the room and desired them here to rest from their fatigues, while I myself, in the wild audacity of my perfect triumph, placed my own seat upon the very spot beneath which reposed the corpse of the victim. The officers were satisfied. My manner had convinced them. I was singularly at ease. They sat, and while I answered cheerily, they chatted of familiar things. But ere long I felt myself getting pale, and wished them gone. My head ached, and I fancied a ringing in my ears. But still, they sat and chatted. The ringing became more distinct. It continued and became more distinct. I talked more freely to get rid of the feeling, but it continued and gained definiteness, until at length I found that the noise was not within my ears. No doubt I now grew very pale, but I talked more fluently and with a heightened voice. Yet the sound increased, and what could I do? It was a low, dull, quick sound, much such a sound as a watch makes when enveloped in cotton. I gasped for breath, and yet the officers heard it not. I talked more quickly, more vehemently, but the noise steadily increased. I arose and argued about trifles in a high key and with violent gesticulations, but the noise steadily increased. Why would they not be gone? I paced the floor to and fro with heavy strides, as if excited to fury by the observations of the men, but the noise steadily increased. Oh God, what could I do? I foamed, I raved, I swore. I swung the chair upon which I had been sitting and grated it upon the boards, but the noise arose over all and continually increased. It grew louder, 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 and still the men chatted pleasantly and smiled. Was it possible they heard not? Almighty God, no, no, they heard, they suspected, they knew. They were making a mockery of my horror. This I thought, and this I think. But anything was better than this agony. Anything was more tolerable than this derision. I could bear those hypocritical smiles no longer. I felt I must scream or die, and now, again, hark, louder, 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 louder. Villains, I shrieked, dissemble no more. I admit the deed. Tear up the planks. Here, here, it is the beating of his hideous heart. And that was The Telltale Heart by Edgar Allan Poe. It's one of my favorites. It's a really good book. Short story. I'm sure most of you who are in high school currently or have been in high school remember that one. All of these are pretty prevalent on the repertoire for high school students. All except for 2, which are more comedic than horrific. But those are for later. The next one we are going to be reading is actually a poem. It is not a short story. This one is The Raven. And this is one of his more well-known ones. Hey, Windsor! Hey, how you doing? How are things? It's been a while since we've talked. Okay, so this one is written in verse, so it is technically not a piece of, it's not a short story, but it is one of his better known poems, and I would be remiss if I didn't read it on Spooky Story Night. So we will begin on The Raven by Edgar Allan Poe. Once upon a midnight dreary, while I pondered, weak and weary, over many a quaint and curious volume of forgotten lore, while I nodded, nearly napping, suddenly there came a tapping, as if of someone gently rapping at my chamber door. "'Tis some visitor," I muttered, tapping at my chamber door. "Only this, and nothing more." Ah, distinctly I remember, it was in the bleak December, and each separate dying ember wrought its ghost upon the floor. Eagerly I wished the morrow, vainly I had sought to borrow from my books surcease of sorrow, sorrow for the lost Lenore, for the rare and radiant maiden whom the angels name Lenore, nameless here forevermore. And the silken, sad, uncertain rustling of each purple curtain thrilled me, filled me with fantastic terrors never felt before, so that now, to still the beating of my heart, I stood repeating, "'Tis some visitor entreating entrance at my chamber door. Some late visitor entreating entrance at my chamber door. This it is, and nothing more." Presently, my soul grew stronger, hesitating then no longer. "Sir," said I, "or madam, truly your forgiveness I implore. But the fact is, I was napping, and so gently you came rapping, and so faintly you came tapping at my chamber door, that I scarce was sure I heard you." Here I opened wide the door. Darkness there, and nothing more. Deep into that darkness peering, long I stood there, wondering, fearing, doubting, dreaming dreams no mortals ever dared to dream before. But the silence was unbroken, and the stillness gave no token, and the only word there spoken was the whispered word, "Lenore?" This I whispered, and an echo murmured back the word, "Lenore." Merely this, and nothing more. Oh, I totally forgot. I have this for when I do readings. I've had this for a while. I haven't had a chance to use it yet. Back into the chamber turning, all my soul within me burning. Soon again I heard a tapping, something louder than before. "Surely," said I, "surely that is something at my window lattice. Let me see then what thereat is, and this mystery explore. Let my heart be still a moment, and this mystery explore. 'Tis the wind, and nothing more." Open here I flung the shutter, when, with many a flirt and flutter, in there stepped a stately raven of the saintly days of yore. Not the least obeisance made he, not a minute stopped, or stayed he, but with mane of lord or lady, perched upon my chamber door, perched upon a bust of Pallas just above my chamber door, perched, and sat, and nothing more. Then the ebony bird beguiling my sad fancy into smiling, by the grave and stern decorum of the countenance it wore. "Though thy crest be shorn and shaven, thou," I said, "art sure no craven, ghastly grim and ancient raven, wandering from the nightly shore. Tell me what thy lordly name is, on the night's Plutonian shore. Quoth the raven, nevermore. Much I marvelled this ungainly fowl to hear discourse so plainly, though its answer little meaning, little relevancy bore, for we cannot help agreeing that no living human being ever yet was blessed with seeing bird above his chamber door, bird or beast upon the sculptured bust above his chamber door, with such name as nevermore. But the raven, sitting lonely on that placid bust, spoke only that one word, as if its soul in that one word he did outpour. Nothing farther than he uttered, not a feather than he fluttered, till I scarcely more than muttered, other friends have flown before, on the morrow he will leave me, as my hopes have flown before. Then the bird said, nevermore. Startled at the stillness broken by reply so aptly spoken, doubtless, said I, what it utters is its only stock and store, caught from some unhappy master, whom unmerciful disaster followed fast and followed faster, till his songs one burden bore, till the dirges of his hope that melancholy burden bore of nevermore. But the raven, still beguiling all my sad soul into smiling, straight I wheeled a cushioned seat in front of bird and bust and door. Then upon the velvet sinking, I betook myself to linking fancy unto fancy, thinking what this ominous bird of yore, what this grim, ungainly, ghastly, gaunt, and ominous bird of yore, meant in croaking, nevermore. This I sat engaged in guessing, but no syllable expressing, to the fowl whose fiery eyes now burned into my bosom's core. This and more I sat divining, with my head at ease reclining on the cushion's velvet lining, that the lamplight gloated o'er, but whose velvet violet lining with the lamplight gloating o'er. She shall press, nevermore. Then methought the air grew denser, perfumed from an unseen censer swung by seraphim whose footfalls tinkled on the tufted floor. Wretch, I cried, thy God hath lent thee, by these angels he hath sent thee, respite nepenthe from thy memories of Lenore. Quaff, oh quaff, this kind nepenthe, and forget this lost Lenore. Quoth the raven, nevermore. Prophet, said I, thing of evil, prophet still if bird or devil, whether tempter sent or whether tempest tossed thee here ashore, desolate yet all undaunted, on this desert land enchanted, on this home by horror haunted, tell me truly, I implore, is there balm in Gilead? Tell me, I implore. Quoth the raven, nevermore. Prophet, said I, thing of evil, prophet still if bird or devil, by that heaven that bends above us, by that God we both adore, tell this soul with sorrow laden if within the distant Aden it shall clasp a sainted maiden whom the angels name Lenore, clasp a rare and radiant maiden whom the angels name Lenore. Quoth the raven, nevermore. Be that our sign of parting, bird or fiend, I shrieked, upstarting. Get thee back into the tempest and into the night's Plutonian shore. Leave no black plume as a token of that lie thy soul hath spoken. Leave my loneliness unbroken. Quit the bust above my door. Take thy beak from out my heart, and take thy form from off my door. Quoth the raven, nevermore. And the raven, never flitting, still is sitting on the pallid bust of Pallas just above my chamber door, and his eyes have all the seeming of a demon's that is dreaming, and the lamplight o'er him streaming throws his shadows on the floor, and my soul from out that shadow that lies floating on the floor shall be lifted nevermore. And that was The Raven by Edgar Allan Poe. Again, one of the great American classics, one of his better-known poems. Certainly not my favorite, that lies with another, but definitely one of the better ones, yes. How are we all doing? How are we all doing right now, chat? Hopefully soon I'll be getting the new model rigged, and then I'll be able to have a new model debut for you all. It's gonna be great. For those who don't know, the Raven does bring up a little known fact about ravens and corvids in general. They are actually capable of learning speech. Intelligence-wise, ravens are about as intelligent as a 7 to 10-year-old child. So they can actually learn short phrases and words and say them on command. And they are there are some flocks that have actually entered their own Stone Age. It's pretty crazy. Ravens will actually actively gather around a dead raven, like a roadkill raven or something, and they will investigate the death to see if it's still a safe area for the flock to be in. And if they find that it's not a safe area for them, then they will move on. It's quite crazy. They're very, very intelligent birds, and people do not know that about them. Okay, so the next thing. Yeah, birds are now the new humans. We've been surpassed. This is just hot to full boyfriend now. Yeah. Ravens are really cool creatures, and I actually have a friend that lives with a rescued raven. It can no longer fly, so it can't live amongst the wild ravens anymore. So she just kind of keeps it in her house. And Bird is great, but she describes it as like living with a hormonal toddler with an ice pick for a face. Okay, so next one we're reading is going to be The Mask of the Red Death. This is my favorite of all of his short stories. Like, my favorite. Not very many people have read this one. Some schools do cover it during their American literature units, but not every school does. I covered it when I was in middle school. I took a SAT prep class, and we read it as part of the class. So because Poe likes to use very grandiose, over ornate language in his writing. And so it's really good training for the lesser known words that you might encounter during the SAT and the ACT. So it's really cool. I really like this one. Just because this one is terrifying in its own way. I would say much more terrifying than just straight up murder and being killed because a bird scared the crap out of you. Okay, so now we begin The Mask of the Red Death by Edgar Allan Poe. The Red Death had long devastated the country. No pestilence had ever been so fatal or so hideous. Blood was its avatar and its seal, the redness and the horror of blood. There were sharp pains and sudden dizziness, and then profuse bleeding at the pores with dissolution. The scarlet stains upon the body and especially upon the face of the victim were the pest ban which shut him out from aid and from the sympathy of his fellow men. And the whole seizure, progress and termination of the disease were the incidents of half an hour. But the Prince Prospero, was happy and dauntless and sagacious. When his dominions were half depopulated, he summoned to his presence 1,000 hale and light-hearted friends from amongst the knights and dames of his court, and with these retired to the deep seclusion of one of his castellated abbeys. This was an extensive and magnificent structure, the creation of the prince's own eccentric yet august taste. A strong and lofty wall girdled it in. This wall had gates of iron. The courtiers, having entered, brought furnaces and massy hammers and welded the bolts. They resolved to leave means neither of ingress or egress to the sudden impulses of despair or of frenzy within. The abbey was amply provisioned. With such precautions, the courtiers might bid defiance to contagion. The external world could take care of itself. In the meantime, it was folly to grieve or to think. The prince had provided all the appliances of pleasure. There were buffoons, there were improvisatori, there were ballet dancers, there were musicians, there was beauty, there was wine. All these and security were within. Without was the Red Death. It was toward the close of the 5th or 6th month of his seclusion, and while the pestilence raged most furiously abroad, that the Prince Prospero entertained his 1,000 friends at a masked ball of the most unusual magnificence. It was a voluptuous scene, that masquerade, but first let me tell of the rooms in which it was held. There were 7, an imperial suite. In many palaces, however, such suites form a long and straight vista, while the folding doors slide back nearly to the walls on either hand, so that the view of the whole extent is scarcely impeded. Here, the case was very different, as might have been expected from the Duke's love of the bizarre. The apartments were so irregularly disposed that the vision embraced but little more than one at a time. There was a sharp turn at every 20 or 30 yards, and at each turn, a novel effect. To the right and the left, in the middle of each wall, a tall and narrow Gothic window looked out upon a closed corridor which pursued the windings of the suite. These windows were of stained glass whose color varied in accordance with the prevailing hue of the decorations of the chamber upon which it opened. That at the eastern extremity was hung, for example, in blue, and vividly blue were its windows. The second chamber was purple in its ornaments and tapestries, and here the panes were purple. The third was green throughout, and so were the casements. The fourth was furnished and lighted with orange. The fifth was white. The sixth with violet. The 7th apartment was closely shrouded in black velvet tapestries that hung all over the ceiling and down the walls, falling in heavy folds upon a carpet of the same material and hue. But in this chamber only, the color of the windows failed to correspond with the decorations. The panes here were scarlet, a deep blood color. Now, in no one of the 7 apartments was there any lamp or candelabrum amid the profusion of golden ornaments that lay scattered to and fro or depended from the roof. There was no light of any kind emanating from lamp or candle within the suite of chambers. But in the corridors that followed the suite, there stood, opposite to each window, a heavy tripod bearing a brazier of fire that projected its rays through the tinted glass and so glaringly illumined the room. And thus were produced a multitude of gaudy and fantastic appearances. But in the western, or black chamber, the effect of the firelight that streamed upon the dark hangings through the blood-tinted panes was ghastly in the extreme, and produced so wild a look upon the countenances of those who entered, that there were few of the company bold enough to set foot within its precincts at all. Hello, Elman. Hello, Glitchtail. Hello, hello, hello. Welcome. We are reading The Mask of the Red Death by Edgar Allan Poe. It's a chill, spooky story stream. Continuing now. It was in this apartment, also, that there stood against the western wall a gigantic clock of ebony. Its pendulum swung to and fro with a dull, heavy, monotonous clang. And when the minute hand made the circuit of the face and the hour was to be stricken, there came from the brazen lungs of the clock a sound which was clear and loud and deep and exceedingly musical, but of so peculiar a note and emphasis that, at each lapse of an hour, the musicians of the orchestra were constrained to pause momentarily in their performance to hearken to the sound, and thus the waltzers perforce ceased their evolutions, and there was a brief disconcert of the whole gay company. And while the chimes of the clock yet rang, it was observed that the giddiest grew pale. The more aged and sedate passed their hands over their brows, as if in confused reverie or meditation. But when the echoes had finally ceased, a light laughter at once pervaded the assembly. The musicians looked at each other and smiled, as if their own nervousness and folly, and made whispering vows, each to each other, that the next chiming of the clock should produce in them no similar emotion. And then, after the lapse of 60 minutes, which embraced 3,600 seconds of the time that flies, there came yet another chiming of the clock, and then were the same disconcert and tremulousness and meditation as before. But in spite of these things, it was a gay and magnificent revel. The tastes of the Duke were peculiar. He had a fine eye for colors and effects. He disregarded the decor of mere fashion. His plans were bold and fiery, and his conceptions glowed with barbaric luster. There are some who would have thought him mad. His followers felt that he was not. It was necessary to hear and see and touch him to be sure that he was not. He had directed, in great part, the movable embellishments of the seven chambers upon occasion of this grand fete, and it was his own guiding taste which had given character to the masqueraders. Be sure they were grotesque. There was much glare and glitter and piquancy and phantasm, much of what has since seen in Hernani. There were arabesque figures with unsuited limbs and appointments. There were delirious fancies, such as the madman fashions. There were much of the beautiful, much of the wanton, much of the bizarre, something of the terrible, and not a little of that which might have excited disgust. To and fro in the seven chambers there stalked, in fact, a multitude of dreams. And these, the dreams, writhed in and about, taking hue from the rooms and causing the wild music of the orchestra to seem as the echo of their steps. And anon there strikes the ebony clock which stands in the hall of the velvet. And then, for a moment, all is still, and all is silent save the voice of the clock. The dreams are stiff frozen as they stand. But the echoes of the chime die away. They have endured but an instant, and a light, half-subdued laughter floats after them as they depart. And now again the music swells, and the dreams live and writhe to and fro more merrily than ever, taking hue from the many-tinted windows through which stream the rays from the tripods. But to the chamber which lies most westwardly of the seven, there are now none of the maskers who venture, for the night is waning away, and there flows a ruddier light through the blood-colored panes, and the blackness of the sable drapery appalls, and to him whose foot falls upon the sable carpet, there comes from the near clock of ebony a muffled peal, more solemnly emphatic than any which reaches their ears, who indulge in the more remote gaieties of the other apartments. But these other apartments were densely crowded, and in them beat fervorishly the heart of life. And the revel went whirlingly on until at length there commenced the sounding of midnight upon the clock. And then the music ceased, as I have told, and the evolutions of the waltzers were quieted, and there was an uneasy cessation of all things as before. But now there were 12 strokes to be sounded by the bell of the clock, and thus it happened, perhaps that more of thought crept, with more of time, into the meditations of the thoughtful among those who reveled. And thus, too, it happened, perhaps, that before the last echoes of the last chime had utterly sunk into silence, there were many individuals in the crowd who had found leisure to become aware of the presence of a masked figure which had arrested the attention of no single individual before. And the rumor of this new presence having spread itself whisperingly around, there arose at length from the whole company a buzz or murmur expressive of disapprobation and surprise, then finally of terror, horror, and of disgust. In an assembly of phantasms such as I have painted, it may well be supposed that no ordinary appearance could have excited such sensation. In truth, the masquerade license of the night was nearly unlimited. But the figure in question had out-Heroded Herod, and gone beyond the bounds of even the prince's indefinite decorum. There are chords in the hearts of the most reckless which cannot be touched without emotion, even with the utterly lost, to whom life and death are equally jests. There are matters of which no jest can be made. The whole company, indeed, seemed now deeply to feel that in the costume and bearing of the stranger neither wit nor propriety existed. The figure was tall and gaunt and shrouded from head to foot in the habiliments of the grave. The mask which concealed the visage was made so nearly to resemble the countenance of a stiffened corpse that the closest scrutiny must have had difficulty in detecting the cheat. And yet all this might have been endured, if not approved by the mad revelers around. But the mummer had gone so far as to assume the type of the Red Death. His vesture was dabbled in blood, and his broad brow, with all the features of the face, was besprinkled with the scarlet horror. When the eyes of Prince Prospero fell upon this spectral image, which was a slow and solemn movement, as if more fully to sustain its role, stalked to and fro amongst the waltzers, he was seen to be convulsed in the first moment with a strong shudder, either of terror or distaste, but in the next his brow reddened with rage. "Who dares," he demanded hoarsely of the courtiers who stood near him, "who dares insult us with this blasphemous mockery? Seize him and unmask him, that we may know whom we have to hang at sunrise from the battlements." It was in the eastern or blue chamber in which stood the Prince Prospero as he uttered these words. They rang throughout the 7 rooms loudly and clearly, for the prince was a bold and robust man, and the music had become hushed at the waving of his hand. It was in the blue room where stood the prince, with a group of pale courtiers by his side. At first, as he spoke, there was a slight rushing movement of this group in the direction of the intruder who, at the moment, was also near at hand, and now, with deliberate and stately step, made closer approach to the speaker. But from a certain nameless awe with which the mad assumptions of the mummer had inspired the whole party, there were found none who put forth hand to seize him, so that, unimpeded, he passed within a yard of the prince's person, and while the vast assembly, as if with one impulse, shrank from the centers of the rooms to the walls, he made his way, uninterrupted, with the same solemn and measured step which had distinguished him from the first. Through the blue chamber, to the purple, through the purple, to the green, through the green, to the orange, through this again, to the white, and even thence to the violet, ere a decided movement had been made to arrest him. It was there, however, that the Prince Prospero, maddening with rage and the shame of his own momentary cowardice, rushed hurriedly through the 6 chambers, while none followed him on account of a deadly terror that had seized upon all. He bore aloft a drawn dagger, and it approached in rapid impetuosity, to within 3 or 4 feet of the retreating figure within the latter. Having attained the extremity of the velvet compartment, turned suddenly and confronted his pursuer. With a sharp cry, and the dagger dropped gleaming upon the sable carpet, upon which, instantly afterward, fell prostrate in death the Prince Prospero. Then, summoning the wild courage of despair, a throng of the revelers at once threw themselves into the black apartment, and seizing the mummer, whose tall figure stood erect and motionless within the shadow of the ebony clock, gasped in unutterable horror at finding the grave cerements and corpse-like mask with which they handled with so violent a rudeness, untenanted by any tangible form. And now was acknowledged the presence of the Red Death. He had come like a thief in the night, and one by one dropped the revelers in the blood-bedewed halls of their revel, and died each in the despairing posture of his fall. And the life of the ebony clock went out with that of the last of the gay, and the flames of the tripods expired, and darkness and decay and the Red Death held illimitable dominion over all. And that was The Mask of the Red Death. Again, one of my favorites. Definitely one of my favorites. Yes, classic. American classic. King of the American short story. Just fantastic. Really. Truly. I love Edgar Allan Poe. And now, to kind of finish up the stream, I'm going to do 2 more by him. These are a lot more comedic than the horror stories that I've already read. They come in a pair. The stories are How to Write a Blackwood Article and A Predicament. And it follows one lady named Signora Psyche Zenobia. It's funny. You guys are gonna enjoy this, I promise. You guys will definitely think this is really funny because she is so delusional in the best way. Some backstory. At the time, there existed a women's movement where women would get together and write stories, tales for each other. And they fancied themselves educated young ladies of means. And Edgar hated these women muchly. He thought they were pretentious and that they were completely delusional in how, in their thinking. He thought that they were so wrapped up in themselves that they didn't realize that they were not very good writers. And they usually distinguished themselves by wearing blue stockings. And so blue stockings became synonymous with these kind of learned women. So keep that in mind while you hear this set of tales. We are going to be starting with How to Write a Blackwood Article. And Blackwood refers to the Blackwood magazine, which was a Scottish horror magazine. So this is going to be fun. In the name of the prophets, figs, cry of the Turkish fig peddler. I presume everybody has heard of me. My name is the Signora Psyche Zenobia. This I know to be a fact. Nobody but my enemies ever calls me Suki Snobs. I have been assured that Suki is but a vulgar corruption of psyche, which is good Greek, and means the soul. That's me, I'm all soul. And sometimes a butterfly, which latter meaning undoubtedly alludes to my appearance in my new crimson satin dress with the sky blue Arabian mantelette and the trimmings of green agrafas and the 7 flounces of orange-colored auriculus. As for snobs, any person who should look at me would be instantly aware that my name wasn't Snobs. Miss Tabitha Turnip propagated that report through sheer envy. Tabitha Turnip, indeed. Oh, the little wretch. But what can we expect from a turnip? Wonder if she remembers the old adage about blood out of a turnip? Memorandum. Put her in mind of it the first opportunity. Memorandum again. Pull her nose. Where was I? I have been assured that Snobs is a mere corruption of Zenobia, and that Zenobia was a queen. So am I. Dr. Moneypenny always calls me the Queen of the Hearts, and that Zenobia, as well as Psyche, is good Greek, and that my father was a Greek. Davy. Give me a minute, guys. My son would like to say hello.
Hi. Someone just listen on the headphones.
No, honey. Nobody's talking.
It's just mommy.
It's just mommy.
Let's say mommy. There are a lot of my buggies.
Yes.
Whoa.
He saw my figurines on the top shelf.
like there's a pony back.
Yeah, there's ponies.
What is that?
Okay. You want more?
Sorry about that, everybody. I didn't expect that, honestly. Okay, let's continue our reading. If my husband would close the door behind him, that would be lovely. Okay, I'm back. Here we are. And that Zenobia, as well as Psyche, is good Greek, and that my father was a Greek, and that consequently, I have a right to our patronymic, which is Zenobia, and not by any means Snobs. Nobody but Tabitha Turnip calls me Suki Snobs. I am the Signora Psyche Zenobia. As I said before, everybody has heard of me. I am that very Signora Psyche Zenobia, so justly celebrated as corresponding secretary to the Philadelphia Regular Exchange Teetotal Young Bells Letters Universal Experimental Bibliographical Association to Civilize Humanity. Dr. Moneypenny made the title for us and says he chose it because it sounded big like an empty rum puncheon. A vulgar man that sometimes, but he's deep. We all sign the initials of the society after our names in the fashion of the RSA, Royal Society of Arts, the SDUK, Society for the Diffusion of Useful Knowledge, etc., etc. Dr. Moneypenny says that the S stands for stale and that DUK spells duck, but it doesn't. That SDUK stands for stale duck and not for Lord Brougham's Society, but then Dr. Moneypenny is such a queer man that I'm never sure what he's telling me the truth. At any rate, We always add to our names the initials PRETTYBLUEBATCH. That is to say, Philadelphia Regular Exchange Teetotal Young Bells Letters Universal Experimental Bibliographical Association to Civilize Humanity. 1 letter for each word, which is a decided improvement upon Lord Brougham. Goodbye, Isabel. Dr. Moneypenny will have it that our initials give our true character, but for my life I can't see what he means. Notwithstanding the good offices of the doctor and the strenuous exertions of the association to get itself into notice, it met with no very great success until I joined it. The truth is, the members indulged in too flippant a tone of discussion. The papers read every Saturday evening were characterized less by depth than buffoonery. They were all whipped syllabub. There was no investigation of first causes, first principles. There was no investigation of anything at all. There was no attention paid to that great point, the fitness of things. In short, there was no fine writing like this. It was all low. Very. No profundity, no reading, no metaphysics, nothing which the learned call spirituality and which the unlearned choose to stigmatize as cant. Dr. M says I ought to spell cant with a capital K, but I know better. When I joined the society, it was my endeavor to introduce a better style of thinking and writing, and all the world knows how well I've succeeded. We get up as good papers now in the pretty blue batch as any to be found even in Blackwood. I say Blackwood because I've been assured that the finest writing upon every subject is to be discovered in the pages of that justly celebrated magazine. We now take it for our model upon all themes and are getting into rapid notice accordingly. And after all, it's not so difficult a matter to compose an article of the genuine Blackwood stamp, if one only goes properly about it. Of course, I don't speak of the political articles. Everybody knows how they are managed, since Dr. Moneypenny explained it. Mr. Blackwood has a pair of tailor's shears and 3 apprentices who stand by him for orders. One hands them the Times, another the Examiner, and a third a Cully's New Copiendum of Slangwang. Mr. B merely cuts out and intersperses. Soon done, nothing but Examiner, Slangwang, and Times, then Times, Slangwang, and Examiner, and then Times, Examiner, and Slangwang. But the chief merit of the magazine lies in its miscellaneous articles, and the best of those come under the head of what Dr. Moneypenny calls the bizarreries, whatever that may mean, and what everyone else calls the intensities. This is a species of writing which I've long known how to appreciate, although it is only since my late visit to Mr. Blackwood, deputed by the society, that I have been made aware of the exact method of composition. This method is very simple, but not so much so as the politics. Upon my calling at Mr. B's and making known to him the wishes of society, he received me with great civility, took me into his study, and gave me a clear explanation of the whole process. "My dear madam," said he, evidently struck with my majestic appearance, for I had on the crimson satin with the green agraffas and orange-colored auriculas. "My dear madam," said he, "sit down. The matter stands thus. In the first place, your writer of intensities must have very black ink and a very big pen with a very blunt nib. And mark me, Miss Psyche Zenobia," he continued after a pause, with the most expressive energy and solemnity of manner, "mark me. That pen must never be mended. Herein, madam, lies the secret, the soul of intensity. I assume upon myself to say that no individual of however great genius ever wrote with a good pen. Understand me, a good article. You may take it for granted that when a manuscript can be read, it is never worth reading. This is a leading principle in our faith, to which if you cannot readily assent, our conference is at an end." He paused. But of course, as I had no wish to put an end to the conference, I assented to a proposition so very obvious, and one too of whose truth I had all along been sufficiently aware. He seemed pleased, and went on with his introductions. "It may appear invidious in me, Miss Psyche Zenobia, to refer to you any article or set of articles in the way of model or study, yet perhaps I may well call your attention to a few cases. Let me see. There was the dead alive. Capital thing. The record of a gentleman's sensations when entombed before the breath was out of his body, full of tastes, terror, sentiment, metaphysics, and erudition. You would have sworn the writer had been born and brought up in a coffin. Then we had the Confessions of an Opium Eater. Fine, very fine, glorious imagination, deep philosophy, acute speculation, plenty of fire and fury, and a good spicing of the decidedly unintelligible. There was a nice bit of flummery, and went down the throats of the people delightfully. That they would have it that Coleridge wrote the paper, but not so. It was composed by my pet baboon, Juniper, over a rummer of Hollands and water, hot without sugar. This I could scarcely have believed had it been anybody but Mr. Blackwood, who assured me of it. Then there was the involuntary experimentalist, all about a gentleman who got baked in an oven and came out alive and well, although certainly done to a turn. And then there was the diary of a late physician, where the merit lay in good rant and indifferent Greek, both of them taking things with the public. And then there was The Man in the Bell, a paper, by the by, Miss Zenobia, which I cannot sufficiently recommend to your attention. It is the history of a young person who goes to sleep under the clapper of a church bell and is awakened by its tolling for a funeral. The sound drives him mad, and accordingly, pulling out his tablets, he gives a record of his sensations. Sensations are the great thing, after all. Should you ever be drowned or hung, be sure and make a note of your sensations. They will be worth to you 10 guineas a sheet. If you wish to write forcefully, Miss Zenobia, pay minute attention to the sensations. That I certainly will, Mr. Blackwood, said I. Good, he replied. I see you are a pupil after my own heart, but I must put you au fait to the details necessary in composing what may be denominated a genuine Blackwood article of the sensation stamp, the kind with which you will understand me to say I consider the best for all purposes. The first thing requisite is to get yourself into such a scrape as no one has ever got into before. The oven, for instance, that was a good hit, but if you've no oven or big bell at hand, and if you cannot conveniently tumble out of a balloon, or be swallowed up in an earthquake, or get stuck fast in a chimney, you'll have to be contented with simply imagining some similar misadventure. I should prefer, however, that you have the actual fact to bear you out. Nothing so well assists the fancy as an experimental knowledge of the matter at hand. Truth is strange, you know, stranger than fiction, besides being more to the purpose. Here, I assured him I had an excellent pair of garters, and would go and hang myself forthwith. Good, he said, do so. Although hanging is somewhat hackneyed, perhaps you might do better. Take a dose of Bendrith's pills, and then give us your sensations. However, my instructions will apply equally well to any variety of misadventure, and in your way home, you may easily get knocked in the head, or run over by an omnibus, or bitten by a mad dog, or drowned in a gutter. But to proceed. Having determined upon your subject, you must next consider the tone or manner of your narration. This is the tone didactic, the tone enthusiastic, the tone natural, all commonplace enough. But then there's the tone laconic or curt, which has lately come into much use. Consists in short sentences, somehow thus. Can't be too brief, can't be too snappish, always a full stop, and never a paragraph. Then there's the tone elevated, diffusive, and interjectional. Some of our best novelists patronize this tone. The words must be all in a whirl, like a humming top, and make a noise very similar, which answers remarkably well instead of meaning. This is the best of all possible styles, where the writer is in too great a hurry to think. The tone metaphysical is also a good one. If you know any big words, this is your chance for them. Talk of the Ionic and Eleatic schools, of Archytas, Gorgas, and Alcmaeon. Say something about objectivity and subjectivity. Be sure and abuse a man named Locke. Turn up your nose at things in general, and when you let it slip anything a little too absurd, you need not be at the trouble of scratching it out, but just add a footnote and say that you are indebted for the above profound observation to the Critic der reinem Vernunft, or to the Metaphysik afgründig der Naturwissenschaft. Bye, Reese. Thank you. This would look erudite and frank. There are various other tones of equal celebrity, but I shall mention only two more, the tone transcendental and the tone heterogeneous. In the former, the merit consists in seeing into the nature of affairs a great deal further than anybody else. This second sight is very efficient when properly managed. A little reading of the dial will carry you a great way. Eschew, in this case, big words. Get them as small as possible and write them upside down. Look over Channing's poems and quote what he says about a fat little man with a delusive show of can. Put in something about the supernal oneness. Don't say a syllable about the infernal two-ness. Above all, study innuendo. Hint everything, assert nothing. If you feel inclined to say bread and butter, do not by any means say it outright. You may say anything and everything approaching to bread and butter. You may hint at buckwheat cake, or you may even go as far as to insinuate oatmeal porridge. But if bread and butter be your real meaning, be cautious, my dear Miss Psyche, not on any account to say bread and butter.
I assured him that I should never say it again as long as I lived. He kissed me and continued.
As for the tone heterogeneous, it is merely a judicious mixture in equal proportions of all the other tones in the world, and is consequently made up of everything deep, great, odd, piquant, pertinent, and pretty. Let us suppose now you have determined upon your incidence and tone. The most important portion, in fact the soul of the whole business, is yet to be attended to. I allude to the filling up. It is not to be supposed a lady, or gentleman either, has been leading the life of a bookworm. And yet above all things, it is necessary that your article have an air of erudition, or at least afford evidence of extensive general reading. Now I'll put you in the way of accomplishing this point. See here, pulling down some 3 or 4 ordinary-looking volumes and opening them at random. By casting your eye down almost any page of any book in the world, you'll be able to perceive at once a host of little scraps of either learning or bel spiritism, which are the very thing for the spicing of a Blackwood article. You might as well note down a few while I read them to you. I shall make 2 divisions. First, piquant facts for the manufacture of similes, and second, piquant expressions to be introduced as occasion may require. Right now! And I wrote as he dictated. Piquant facts for similes. There were originally but 3 muses, Melit, Menaem, Aeode, meditation, memory, and singing. You may make a good deal of that little fact if properly worked. You see, it is not generally known and looks rechargé. You must be careful and give the thing with a downright improviso air. Again, the river Alephus passed beneath the sea and emerged without injury to the purity of its waters. Rather stale, that, to be sure, but if properly dressed and dished up, will look quite as fresh as ever. Here is something better. The Persian Iris appears to some persons to possess a sweet and very powerful perfume, while to others it is perfectly scentless. Fine, that, and very delicate. Turn it about a little, and it will do wonders. We'll have something else in the botanical line. There's nothing goes down so well, especially with the help of a little Latin. Right. The Empedendrum Flos Eris of Java bears a very beautiful flower and will live when pulled up by the roots. The natives suspend it by a cord from the ceiling and enjoy its fragrance for years. That's capital! That will do for the similes. Now for the piquant expressions. Piquant expressions. The venerable Chinese novel Zhu Qiao Li. Good. By introducing these few words with dexterity, you will evince your intimate acquaintance with the language and literature of the Chinese. With the aid of this, you can either get along without either Arabic or Sanskrit or Chickasaw. There's no passing muster, however, without Spanish, Italian, German, Latin, and Greek. I must look you out a little specimen of each. Any scrap will answer, because you must depend upon your own ingenuity to make it fit into your article. Now write. Aussi tendre que zer. As tender as zer. French alludes to the frequent repetition of the phrase la tendresse in the French tragedy of that name. Properly introduced will show not only your knowledge of the language, but your general reading and wit. You can say, for instance, that the chicken you were eating, write an article about being choked to death by a chicken bone, was not altogether aussi tendre que zer. Right. Van muerte tan escondida que no te sienta venir, porque el placer de morir no me torne a dar la vida. That's Spanish from Miguel de Cervantes. Come quickly, O death, but be sure and don't let me see you coming, lest the pleasure I shall feel at your appearance should unfortunately bring me back again to life. This you may slip in quite a propos when you are struggling in the last agonies with the chicken bone. Right. Il povero uomo che no sen era accorto andava combattiendo a era morto. That's Italian, you perceive, from Aristo. It means that a great hero, in the heat of combat, not perceiving that he has been fairly killed, continued to fight valiantly, dead as he was. The application of this to your own case is obvious, for I trust, Miss Psyche, that you will not neglect to kick for at least an hour and a half after you've been choked to death by that chicken bone. Please to write. Okay, I can't say that. That's German. I can only say it badly. Unservich dos no servich den dirci. That's German from Schiller. And if I die, at least I die for thee, for thee. Here it is clear that you're apostrophizing the cause of your disaster, the chicken. Indeed, what gentleman, or lady either of sense, wouldn't die, I should like to know, for a well-fattened capon of the right Malacca breed, stuffed with capers and mushrooms, and served up in a salad bowl with orange jellies and mosaics. Right! You can get them that way at Tortoni's. Right, if you please. Oh my goodness. This guy is wordy. Here's a nice little Latin phrase, and rare too. One can't be too rechargé or brief in one's Latin. It's getting so common. Ignorato elenchi. He has committed an ignorato elenchi, that is to say, he has understood the words of your proposition, but not the idea. The man was a fool, you see, some poor fellow whom you address while choking with that chicken bone, and who therefore didn't precisely understand what you were talking about. Throw that in his teeth, and at once you have him annihilated. If he dares to reply, you can tell him from Lucan, here it is, that speeches are mere anemone verborum, anemone words. The anemone, with great brilliancy, has no smell. Or if he begins to bluster, you may be down upon him with insomnia Jovi, reveries of Jupiter. A phrase which Silius Italianicus, see here, applies to thoughts pompous and inflated. This will be sure and cut him to the heart. He can do nothing but roll over and die. Will you be kind enough to write? Oh my goodness. In Greek, we must have something pretty, from Demosthenes, for example. For he that flies may flight again, which he can never do that's slain. In a Blackwood article, nothing makes so fine a show as your Greek. The very letters have an air of profundity about them. Only observe, madam, the astute look of that epsilon. That phi ought certainly to be a bishop. Was there ever a smarter fellow than that Omicron? Just twig that, Tau. In short, there's nothing like Greek for a genuine sensation paper. In the present case, your application is the most obvious thing in the world. Rap out the sentence with a huge oath, and by way of ultimatum at the good-for-nothing dunderhead villain who couldn't understand your plain English in relation to the chicken bone. He'll take the hint and be off, you may depend on it.
These were all the instructions Mr. B could afford me upon the topic in question, but I felt that they would be entirely sufficient. I was at length able to write a genuine Blackwood article, and determined to do with forthwith. In taking leave of me, Mr. B made a proposition for the purchase of the paper when written, but as he could only offer me 50 guineas a sheet, I thought it better to let our society have it than sacrifice it for so paltry a sum. Notwithstanding this spirit, however, the gentleman showed his consideration for me in all other respects, and indeed treated me with the greatest civility. His parting words made a deep impression upon my heart, and I hope I shall always remember them with gratitude.
My dear Zenobia, he said, while the tears stood in his eyes, is there anything else I can do to promote the success of your laudable undertaking? Let me reflect. It is just possible that you may not be able, so soon as convenient, to get yourself drowned, or choked with a chicken bone, or hung, or bitten by a... But stay. Now I think me of it, there are a couple of very excellent bulldogs in the yard, fine fellows, I assure you, savage and all that, indeed. Just the thing for your money. They'll have you eaten up, auricula and all, in less than 5 minutes. Here's my watch, and then only think of the sensations. Here, I say, Tom, Peter, Dick, you villain, let out those. But as I was really in a great hurry, and had not another moment to spare, I was reluctantly forced to expedite my departure, and accordingly took leave at once. Somewhat more abruptly, I admit, than the strict courtesy would have otherwise allowed. It was my primary object, upon quitting Mr. Blackwood, to get into some immediate difficulty, pursuant to his advice, and with this view I spent the greater part of the day in wandering about Edinburgh, seeking to have desperate adventures adequate to the intensity of my feelings, and adapted to the vast character of the article I intended to write. In this excursion, I was attended by one servant, Pompey, and my little lapdog, Diana, who I had brought with me from Philadelphia. It was not, however, until late in the afternoon that I fully succeeded in my arduous undertaking. An important event then happened, of which the following Blackwood article, in the tone heterogeneous, is the substance and result.
anything that I said wrong during the course of that, let's just chalk it up to making fun of the people in it. And trust me, all of those things are going to pale in comparison to how wrong Miss Psyche gets everything in this. Again, this is going to be our last one. This follows on the heels of How to Write a Blackwood article and is entitled A Predicament. What chance, good lady, hath bereft you thus, Comus? It was a quiet and still afternoon when I strolled forth in the goodly city of Edina. The confusion and bustle in the streets were terrible. Men were talking, women were screaming, children were choking, pigs were whistling, carts they rattled, bulls they bellowed, cows they lowed, horses they neighed, cats they caterwauled, dogs they danced. Danced! Could it then be possible? Danced! Alas, thought I, my dancing days are over. Thus it is ever. What a host of gloomy recollections will ever and anon be wakened in the mind of a genius, an imaginative contemplation, especially of a genius doomed to the everlasting and eternal, and continual, and as one might say, the continued, yes, the continued and continuous, bitter, harassing, disturbing, and if I may be allowed the expression, the very disturbing influence of the serene and godlike and heavenly and exalted and elevated and purifying effect of what may rightly be termed the most enviable, the most truly enviable, nay, the most benignly beautiful, the most delicately ethereal, and, as it were, the most pretty, if I may use so bold an expression, thing, pardon me, gentle reader, in the world. But I am always led away by my feelings. In such a mind, I repeat, what a host of recollections are stirred up by a trifle. The dogs danced. I could not. They frisked. I wept. They capered. I sobbed aloud. Touching circumstantials. What cannot fail to bring up the recollection of the classical reader that exquisite passage in relation to the fitness of things, which is to be found at the commencement of the 3rd volume of that admirable and venerable Chinese novel, The Jogo Slow. In my solitary walk through the city, I had 2 humble but faithful companions. Diana, my poodle, sweetest of creatures. She had a quantity of hair over one eye and a blue ribbon tied fashionably around her neck. Diana was not more than 5 inches in height, but her head was somewhat bigger than her body, and her tail, being cut off exceedingly close, gave an air of injured innocence to the interesting animal which rendered her a favorite with all. And Pompey, my servant, sweet Pompey, how shall I ever forget thee? I had taken Pompey's arm. He was 3 feet in height, I like to be particular, and about 70 or perhaps 80 years of age. He had bow legs and was corpulent. His mouth should not be called small, nor were his ears short. His teeth, however, were like pearl, and his large, full eyes were deliciously white. Nature had endowed him with no neck, and had placed his ankles, as usual with that race, in the middle of the upper portion of the feet. He was clad with a striking simplicity. His sole garments were a stock of 9 inches in height, and a nearly new drab overcoat which had formerly been in the service of the tall, stately, and illustrious Dr. Moneypenny. It was a good overcoat. It was well cut. It was well made. The coat was nearly new. Pompey held it up out of the dirt with both hands. There were 3 persons in our party, and 2 of them had already been the subject of remark. There was a third. That person was myself. I am the Signora Psyche Zenobia. I am not Suki Snobs. My appearance is commanding. On the memorable occasion of which I speak, I was habited in a crimson satin dress, with a sky-blue Arabian mantelet, and the dress had trimmings of green agraffas and 7 graceful flounces of the orange-colored auricula. I thus formed the third of the party. There was the poodle, there was Pompey, there was myself. We were 3. Thus it was said there were originally but 3 furies, Melty, Nimmy, and Hetty, meditation, memory, and fiddling. Leaning upon the arm of the gallant Pompey, and attended at a respectable distance by Diana, I proceeded down one of the populous and very pleasant streets of the now deserted Edina. On a sudden, there presented itself to view a church, a Gothic cathedral, vast, venerable, and with a tall steeple, which towered into the sky. What madness now possessed me?
Why did I rush upon my fate? I was seized with an uncontrollable desire to ascend the giddy pinnacle and then survey the immense extent of the city. The door of the cathedral stood invitingly open. My destiny prevailed. I entered the ominous archway. Where then was my guardian angel, if indeed such angels there be? If, distressing monosyllable, what world of mystery and meaning and doubt and uncertainty is involved in thy 2 letters? I entered the ominous archway. I entered, and without injury to my orange-colored auriculas, I passed beneath the portal and emerged within the vestibule. There, it said, the immense river Alfred passed unscathed and unwetted beneath the sea. I thought the staircase would never have an end. Round, yes, they went round and up and round and up and round and up until I could not help surmising with the sagacious Poppy, upon which supporting arm I leaned in all the confidence of early affection. I could not help surmising that the upper end of the continuous spiral ladder had been accidentally, or perhaps designedly, removed. I paused for breath, and in the meantime an accident occurred of too momentous a nature, in a moral and also in a metaphysical point of view, to be passed over without notice. It appeared to me, indeed, I was quite confident of the fact, I could not be mistaken. No, I had for some moments carefully and anxiously observed the motions of my Diana. I say I could not be mistaken. Diana smelt a rat. At once I called Pompey's attention to the subject, and he agreed with me. There was then no longer any reasonable room for doubt. The rat had been smelled, and by Diana. Heavens! Shall I ever forget the intense excitement of the moment? Alas, what is the boasted intellect of man? The rat, it was there. That is to say, it was somewhere. Diana smelled the rat. I could not. Thus it is said that the Prussian Isis has for some persons a sweet and very powerful perfume, while to others it is perfectly scentless. The staircase had been surmounted, and there was now only 3 or 4 more upward steps intervening between us and the summit. We still ascended, and only now 1 step remained. 1 step, 1 little step. Upon one such little step in the great staircase of human life, how vast a sum of human happiness or misery depends. I thought of myself, then of Pompey, and then of the mysterious and inexplicable destiny which surrounded us. I thought of Pompey. Alas, I thought of love. I thought of my many false steps which had been taken and may be taken again. I resolved to be more cautious, more reserved. I abandoned the arm of Pompey, and without his assistance surmounted the 1 remaining step and gained the chamber of the belfry. I was followed immediately afterwards by my poodle. Pompey alone remained behind. I stood at the head of the staircase and encouraged him to ascend. He stretched forth to me his hand, and unfortunately in doing so was forced to abandon his firm hold upon the overcoat. Will the gods never cease their persecution? The overcoat is dropped, and with one of his feet, Pompey stepped upon the long and trailing skirt of the overcoat. He stumbled and fell. This consequence was inevitable. He fell forward, and with a cursed head, striking me full in the breast, precipitated me headlong, together with himself, upon the hard, filthy, and detestable floor of the belfry. But my revenge was sure, sudden, and complete. Seizing him furiously by the wool with both hands, I tore out a vast quantity of black and crisp and curling material and tossed it from me with every manifestation of disdain. It fell among the ropes of the belfry and remained. Pompey arose and said no word, but he regarded me piteously with his large eyes and sighed. Ye gods, that sigh! It sunk into my heart. The hair, the wool, could I have reached that wool, I would have bathed in it with my tears in testimony of regret. But alas, it was now far beyond my grasp, and as it dangled among the cordage of the bell, I fancied it alive. I fancied that it stood on end with indignation. Thus the happy dandy Flo Eris of Java bears, it is said, a beautiful flower which will live when pulled up by the roots. The natives suspend it by a cord from the ceiling and enjoy its fragrance for years. Hi, Octo. Hello. Welcome. We are reading A Predicament by Edgar Allan Poe. It's one of his more comedic ventures. Our quarrel was now made up, and we looked about the room for an aperture through which to observe the city of Edina. Windows there were none. The sole light emitted into the gloomy chamber proceeded from a square opening about 1 foot in diameter at a height of about 7 feet from the floor. Yet, what will the energy of true genius not effect? I resolved to clamber up into the hole. A vast quantity of wheels, pinions, and other cabalistic-looking machinery stood opposite the hole, close to it, and Through the hole there passed an iron rod from the machinery. Between the wheels and the wall where the hole lay there was barely room for my body, yet I was desperate and determined to persevere. I called Pompey to my side. "You perceive that aperture, Pompey? I wish to look through it. You stand here just beneath the hole. So. Now, hold out one of your hands, Pompey, and let me step upon it, thus. Now the other hand, Pompey, and with its aid I will get upon your shoulders." He did everything I wished, and I found, upon getting up, that I could easily pass my head and neck through the aperture. The prospect was sublime. Nothing could be more magnificent. I merely paused a moment to bid Diana behave herself, and assure Pompey that I would be considerate and bear as lightly as possible upon his shoulders. I told him I would be tender of his feelings, aussi tender que beefsteak. Having done this justice to my faithful friend, I gave myself up with great zest and enthusiasm to the enjoyment of the scene which so obligingly spread itself out before my eyes. Upon this subject, however, I shall forbear to dilate. I will not describe the city of Edinburgh. Everyone has been to the city of Edinburgh. Everyone has been to Edinburgh, the classic Edina. I will confine myself to the momentous details of my own lamentable adventure. Having in some measure satisfied my curiosity in regard to the extent, situation, and general appearance of the city, I had leisure to observe and survey the church in which I was and the delicate architecture of the steeple. I observed that the aperture through which I had thrust my head was an opening in the dial plate of a gigantic clock, and must have appeared from the street as a large keyhole, such as we see in the face of the French watches. No doubt the true object was to admit the arm of an attendant to adjust when necessary the hands of the clock from within. I observed also, with surprise, the immense size of these hands, the longest of which could not have been less than 10 feet in length, and were broadest 8 or 9 inches in breadth. They were of solid steel, apparently, and their edges appeared to be sharp. Having noticed these particulars, and some others, I again turned my eyes upon the glorious prospect below, and soon became absorbed in contemplation. From this, after some minutes, I was roused by the voice of Pompey, who declared that he could stand it no longer, and requested that I would be so kind as to come down. This was unreasonable, and I told him so in a speech of some length. He replied, but with an evident misunderstanding of my ideas upon the subject. I accordingly grew angry, and told him in plain words that he was a fool, he had committed an ignoramus a clenchee, and his notions were mere insummary bovis, and his words little better than an enemy wit of boredom. With this he appeared satisfied, and I resumed my contemplations. It might have been in half an hour after this altercation when, as I was deeply absorbed in the heavenly scenery beneath me, I was startled by something very cold which pressed with a gentle pressure on the back of my neck. It is needless to say that I felt inexpressibly alarmed. I knew that Pompey was beneath my feet, and that Diana was sitting, according to my explicit directions, upon her hind legs in the furthest corner of the room. What could it be? Alas, I had but soon discovered. Turning my head gently to one side, I perceived, to my extreme horror, that the huge, glittering scimitar-like minute hand of the clock had, in the course of its hourly revolution, descended upon my neck. There was, I knew, not a second to be lost. I pulled back at once, but it was too late. There was no chance of forcing my head through the mouth of that terrible trap in which it was so fairly caught, and which grew narrower and narrower with a rapidity too horrible to be conceived. The agony of that moment is not to be imagined. I threw up my hands and endeavored with all my strength to force upon the ponderous iron bar. I might well have tried to lift the cathedral itself. Down, down, down it came, closer and yet closer. I screamed to Pompey for aid, but he said I had hurt his feelings by calling him an ignorant old squint-eye. I yelled to Diana, but she only said bow, wow, wow, and I had told her on no account to stir from the corner. Thus I had no relief to expect from my associates. Meanwhile, the ponderous and terrific scythe of time, for I now discovered the literal import of that classical phrase, had not stopped, nor was it likely to stop in its career. Down and still down it came. It had already buried its sharp edge a full inch in my flesh, and my sensations grew indistinct and confused. At one time, I fancied myself in Philadelphia with the stately Dr. Moneypenny, at another in the back parlor of Mr. Blackwood, receiving his invaluable instructions. And then again the sweet recollection of better and earlier times came over me, and I thought of that happy period when the world was not all a desert, and Pompey not altogether cruel. The ticking of the machinery amused me. Amused me, I say, for my sensations now bordered upon perfect happiness, and the most trifling circumstances afforded me pleasure. The eternal click-clack, click-clack, click-clack of the clock was the most melodious of music in my ears, and occasionally even put me in mind of the graceful sermonic harangues of Dr. Alapod. Then there were the great figures upon the dial plate. How intelligent, how intellectual they all looked. And presently they took to dancing the mazurka, and I think it was the figure V who performed the most to my satisfaction. She was evidently a lady of breeding, none of your swaggerers, and nothing at all indelicate in her motions. She did the pirouette to admiration, whirling around upon her apex. I made an endeavor to hand her a chair, for I saw that she appeared fatigued with her exertions, and it was not until then that I fully perceived my lamentable situation. Lamentable indeed. The bar had buried itself 2 inches in my neck. I was aroused by a sense of exquisite pain. I prayed for death, and in the agony of the moment could not help repeating those exquisite words of the poet Miguel de Cervantes: Vani burn tan escondida, quire no senti veni, pork and pleasure, deli mori, nami torni dari witty. But now a new horror presented itself, and one indeed sufficient to startle the strongest nerves. My eyes, from the cruel pressure of the machine, were absolutely starting from their sockets. While I was thinking how I should possibly manage without them, one actually tumbled out of my head and, rolling down the steep side of the steeple, lodged in the rain gutter which ran along the eaves of the main building. The loss of the eye was not so much as the insolent air of independence and contempt with which it regarded me after it was out. There it lay in the gutter, just under my nose, and the air as it gives itself would have been ridiculous had it not been disgusting. Such a winking and blinking there was never seen. The behavior on this part of my eye in the gutter was not only irritating on account of its manifest insolence and shameful ingratitude, but was also exceedingly inconvenient on account of the sympathy which always exists between 2 eyes of the same head, however far apart. I was forced in a manner to wink and to blink, whether I would or not, in exact concert with the scoundrelly thing that lay just under my nose. I was presently relieved, however, by the dropping out of the other eye. In falling, it took the same direction, possibly concerted plot, as its fellow. Both rolled out of the gutter together, and in truth I was very glad to get rid of them. The bar was now 4.5 inches deep into my neck, and there was only a little bit of skin to cut through. My sensations were those of entire happiness, for I felt in a few minutes at farthest I should be relieved from my disagreeable situation, and in this expectation I was not at all deceived. At 25 minutes past 5 in the afternoon precisely, the huge minute hand had proceeded sufficiently far on its terrible revolution to sever the small remainder of my neck. I was not sorry to see the head which had occasioned me so much embarrassment at length make a final separation from my body. It first rolled down the side of the steeple, then lodged for a few seconds in the gutter, and then made its way with a plunge into the middle of the street. I will candidly confess that my feelings were now of the most singular, nay, of the most mysterious, the most perplexing and incomprehensible character. My senses were here and there at one in the same moment. With my head, I imagined at one time that I, the head, was the real Signora Psyche Zenobia. At another, I felt convinced that myself, the body, was the proper identity. To clear my ideas on the topic, I felt in my pocket for my snuff-box, but upon getting it and endeavoring to apply a pinch of its grateful contents in the ordinary manner, I became immediately aware of my particular deficiency and threw the box at once down to my head. It took a pinch with great satisfaction and smiled me an acknowledgment in return. Shortly afterwards, it made me a speech which I could hear but indistinctly without ears. I gathered enough, however, to know that it was astonished at my wishing to remain alive under such circumstances. In the concluding sentences, it quoted the noble words of Aristo: Il pover homi che non sera corti, and have a combat tendi eri morti, thus comparing me to the hero who, in the heat of the combat, not perceiving he was dead, continued to contest the battle with indistinguishable valor. There was nothing new now to prevent my getting down from my elevation, and I did so. What it was that Pompey saw so very peculiar in my appearance, I have not yet been able to find out. The fellow opened his mouth from ear to ear and shut his 2 eyes, as if he were endeavoring to crack nuts between the lids. Finally, throwing off his overcoat, he made one spring for the staircase and disappeared. I hurled after the scoundrel these vehement words of Demosthenes: Andrew O'Phelagadon, you really make haste to fly, and then turned to the darling of my heart, to the one-eyed, the shaggy-haired Diana. Alas, what a horrible vision affronted my eyes. Was that a rat I saw skulking into his hole? Are these the picked bones of the little angel who had been cruelly devoured by the monster? Ye gods, and what do I behold? Is that the departed spirit, the shade, the ghost of my beloved puppy, which I perceived sitting with a grace so melancholy in the corner? Hearken, for she speaks in heavens, it is the German of Schiller. Und stubby duck, so stubby done, duck she, alas, and are not her words too true? And if I died, at least I died, for thee, sweet creature. She too had sacrificed herself in my behalf. Dogless, servantless, headless, what now remains for the unhappy Signora Psyche Zenobia? Alas, nothing I have done. And that's the last story that we've got for today. Yeah. Zenobia is not very bright, and you can tell just from those two last stories exactly what Poe thinks of learned ladies with delusions of grandeur. So yeah, those are 5 of my personal favorites of the public domain works of Edgar Allan Poe. And you can find them pretty much anywhere. Do a quick Google search. I highly suggest that if you're going to get any kind of public domain work, that you download it from Project Gutenberg. Project Gutenberg has been around for a very long time, and their entire aim is to make literature publicly available for the common person to download and read at their leisure. They have several different formats that you can download, like PDFs and stuff. This is not sponsored, by the way. This is just a nonprofit that I'm really passionate about. And I would love to see more people taking advantage of it to read books, because I don't think people read enough now. And if you're not willing to read, then at least listen to people read. Poe's poems are classics. They are American classics. Nothing can go wrong, really. And like, again, I remind you that he is the entire reason that we have the genres of detective fiction and crime fiction and science fiction in American literature. He was one of the first to start writing those kinds of things in American literature. He was a genius, and he was also a tragic figure. And we still don't know to this day what killed him so young. It's very sad and very, very... It's a mystery. It really is. Next week, I plan on playing an old 90s point-and-click game that I think you guys are really going to enjoy. It's called Drowned God, Conspiracy of the Ages, and it's well known not necessarily for its gameplay and more for the controversy and the tales of horror behind the development team, specifically the main developer, who we are not entirely sure what happened to him. I will go over more about this, as well as playing the actual game, over the next couple of streams, hopefully. I've been sitting on this for a while. It's a really good game. I remember hearing about it a long time ago, and I'm really excited. We're going to go into this blind. It's going to be great. Spooky month is going well so far. We're having a great time. Oh, hell yeah! Controversy and conspiracy, let's go! So if you like the live reading content, give me a like and leave a comment on the video, on the VOD once it uploads. Really helps me out. if you like my content in general, whether it be playing spooky games or listening to spooky stories or what have you, please subscribe and hit the notification bell so that you can have the content whenever you want. If you want early knowledge of streams happening and discussion about streams, follow my socials. I'm on Twitter and I'm on Discord. And if you join my Discord, then the link will be down in the description so you can easily find it. And bonus, if you donate to my Ko-fi and you become a monthly donator, a member on my Ko-fi account, then you get a special role inside of my Discord. So that comes with a few perks. The link is in the description. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your days. Maybe we'll do another one of these reading streams. That was nice. Got a little dicey near the end because there's a lot of pompous language, but I think that Poe would be quite happy with how badly my descriptions went. I'm not very well versed in things such as Greek and Latin. But yeah, hope everybody has a great day, and I will talk to you guys later.